And I'd now like us to turn the microphone over for the story of St. Teresa of Avila through Toby.
Thank you, St. Teresa of Avila. I'm just going to give some brief history. She was born in the year 1515. Columbus had just opened up the Western Hemisphere to European colonization, and 2 years after she was born, Luther started the Protestant Reformation, and out of all of this change that was happening, it was also the time of the Spanish Inquisition, which was quite brutal and harsh, and the church wasn't living up to its full potential, and there was a lot of darkness and things happening back then that were taking over people. A lot of fears were in control. And then came Teresa pointing the way out from this turmoil toward inner peace through her example. She was born into a very pious family. Her father had fought himself a knighthood, so he made himself a knight and successfully assimilated into the Christian society. Teresa's mother was Beatrice, and she wanted to raise her daughter in a very pious Christian way. At an early age, she went away to join the nuns at the Carmelite nuns. And it wasn't everything that she thought it would be. She thought it would be pious, and it wasn't like that at all. She didn't feel safe there. Many of the women who had no place to go in the world wound up in the convents, whether they had vocations or not, and they would be made to attract people to come in, to give money, and there was lots of things. She wasn't living the spiritual life there that she thought she would be living. She suffered, she said, from the same problems that Francis of Assisi had suffered. She was way too charming, and everyone liked her, and she loved to be liked, and she found it way too easy to slip into her worldly life and ignore God and her prayers. The convent encouraged her to have visitors to whom she would teach mental prayer because their gifts helped the community. It was about this time that Teresa became very ill with malaria. She had a seizure which lasted for 4 days. She was in a coma. They had even dug a grave for her, but she did wake up, and she was paralyzed for 3 years. However, she did come through this disease and this illness, and she said it was with her prayer to Saint Joseph that actually saved her. It was at this time that she started to return back to her prayers and her devotions, and she's claimed that during her illness she rose from the lowest stage called recollection to the devotions of silence, or the devotions of ecstasy, which is something that she did quite often, which was perfect union with God. During this final stage, she said she frequently experienced a rich blessing of tears as the Catholic distinction between mortal and venial sin became clear to her. Around 1556, various friends suggested that her newfound knowledge was actually diabolical and not divine, and she began to inflict some tortures and mortifications upon her flesh until she finally had a true confessor, the Jesuit St. Francis Borgia, who reassured her that these were true and coming from God. And then in 1559, Teresa became firmly convinced that Jesus Christ presented himself to her in bodily form, though invisible. These visions of Jesus Christ lasted uninterrupted for more than 2 years. In another vision, a seraph drove a fiery point of lance repeatedly through her heart, and I'm going to read a quote from her. I saw in his hand a long spear of gold, and at the iron's point there seemed to be a little fire. He appeared to me to be thrusting it at times into my heart and to pierce my very entrails when he drew it out. He seemed to draw them out also and leave me all in fire with a great love of God. The pain was so great that it made me moan, and yet so surpassing was the sweetness of this. And indeed, there is a famous painting and a famous statue called The Ecstasy of St. Teresa, and it's in the Basilica of Santa Maria del Vittorio in Rome, and it's by the famous Baroque artist Bernini, if anybody gets over there to see that. And then she actually began her true mission. In 1567, she received a patent from the Carmelite General, Ravenna, to establish new houses of order, which is what she always wanted to do, was to change the ways and to make these true and pious places and houses. As part of her original patent, she was given permission to set up 2 houses for men who wished to adopt and the reforms. She convinced John of the Cross and Anthony of Jesus to help her with this. They founded the first convent of Descalcist Carmelite Brethren in November 1568 in Durango, Spain. And then around 1567, and this was her movement to start these homes and to bring about powerful reform through starting these homes. In 1576, she was beginning to get persecuted now by the Inquisition, and they were starting to rise up against her, and there was processes drawn against her. And this is very astounding because actually the Inquisition they were so harsh in those days, they probably would have arrested anyone else and just chopped their heads off or whatever it was. But they kind of didn't really accost her very much, and she really got away with everything, and I believe that it was a divine protection that she had. And then finally, all the charges were dropped against her. Pope Gregory XIII allowed a special branch of the nuns, and they started to create more homes. In total, I think she created 17 in 20 years. She had a total of 17 convents, all but one founded by her. And now, also, she was having this very mystical life going on, and she wrote an autobiography and several other books about her mysticism. She would go into ecstasy, and at these times of ecstasy, she would also start to levitate, and she would ask the sisters to please hold her down. And she had 4 stages of prayer that she would write about, and they're very interesting, leading up to the final state, which was, I believe, full connection, full embodiment, and full enlightenment. And she called these 4 stages of prayer. Her final illness overtook her on one of her journeys, and she died in 1582, just as the Catholic nations were making the switch from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. So it's hard to say exactly when she died, but they say it was around midnight of October the 4th. And one of her famous prayers I would like to read to you, and everybody I'm sure has heard this. And it says, "Let nothing disturb you, nothing frighten you. All things are passing. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Nothing is wanting to him who possesses God. God alone suffices."